Humanity's Arrogant Dismissal, 2,000 words. The year was 2356, and humanity had firmly established itself as the dominant power in the Milky Way galaxy. Centuries of rapid technological progress, coupled with an unquenchable drive for exploration and expansion, had allowed the human race to subjugate numerous alien civilizations and bring them under the banner of the Terran Confederacy. At the heart of this human empire was the Terran capital, a bustling metropolis that served as the seat of power and the center of technological innovation. It was here, in the opulent halls of the Confederacy's leadership, that the news of the alien fleet's arrival first reached the ears of the political and military elite. Admiral Mikhail Petrov, the head of the Terran Defense Fleet, received the alert from his intelligence officers with a dismissive wave of his hand. Another group of primitives, no doubt, he scoffed, his weathered features twisted into a condescending sneer. They've seen the might of the Terran Confederacy and have come to beg for mercy. Beside him, President Eliza Harrington, the charismatic and powerful leader of the Confederacy, nodded in agreement. "Prepare our forces, Admiral," she commanded, her steely gaze fixed on the holographic display that showed the alien fleet's position. "We shall teach these upstarts the true meaning of power." The news of the alien fleet's arrival spread like wildfire through the corridors of power, and soon, the Terran capital was abuzz with excitement and anticipation. The general consensus among the political and military elite was that this was simply another routine encounter, a chance to showcase the Confederacy's technological and military superiority to yet another inferior civilization. In the Terran Defense Fleet's command center, the atmosphere was one of quiet confidence. Seasoned officers barked orders, coordinating the deployment of their most advanced warships and weapon systems. They had faced countless alien threats over the years, and each time, the outcome had been the same: a decisive victory for the Terran Confederacy. "This will be over before the day is done," muttered Admiral Petrov, his eyes fixed on the tactical display as the alien fleet drew ever closer. "Those fools have no idea what they're up against." As the alien ships entered the outer edges of the Terran-controlled space, the Confederacy's military prepared to unleash the full might of its arsenal. Squadrons of sleek, futuristic fighter craft were readied for launch, their pilots brimming with confidence and eager for the coming battle. In the Terran capital's Grand Senate chamber, the political leadership gathered to witness the impending confrontation. President Harrington stood at the podium, her expression one of quiet triumph as she addressed the assembled senators and advisors. "Our time has come, my friends," she declared, her voice resonating with certainty and power. "The Terran Confederacy has faced countless challenges, and each time, we have emerged victorious. Today, we shall once again demonstrate the superiority of our civilization and bring these alien invaders to their knees." The senators erupted into thunderous applause, their cheers echoing through the grand chamber. They had long shared in the unwavering belief that humanity was destined to rule the stars, and this encounter with the alien fleet was simply the latest chapter in their ongoing quest for galactic dominance. As the Terran Defense Fleet's warships moved into position, the tension in the air was palpable. Admiral Petrov stood on the bridge of the flagship, his gaze fixed on the approaching alien vessels. "Open a channel," he commanded, his voice laced with a mixture of confidence and disdain. A holographic projection of the alien fleet's commander materialized on the bridge. The alien's features were unfamiliar to the human eye, with strange, angular features and piercing eyes that seemed to bore into the souls of those who gazed upon them. "Attention, alien vessels," Petrov began, his tone dripping with condescension. "You have trespassed into the sovereign territory of the Terran Confederacy. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed." The alien commander's response was calm and measured, yet there was an underlying edge to his words that sent a shiver down the spines of those who heard it. "Terran Confederacy, your arrogance is noted. We have come to assert our dominance over this region of space, and you will submit to our rule." Petrov let out a derisive laugh. "Submit? You must be joking." The Terran Confederacy bows to no one. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied the alien's stoic features. You have one last chance to surrender. If you refuse, we will obliterate your fleet and your pathetic civilization. The alien commander's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Petrov caught a glimpse of something akin to amusement in their depths. So be it, Terran, the alien said, his voice laced with a quiet resolve. You have been warned. With that, the holographic projection flickered and vanished, leaving the bridge of the Terran flagship in stunned silence. Admiral Petrov stared at the empty space, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Deploy all fighters and initiate the attack, he ordered, his voice betraying the slightest hint of uncertainty. Let's show these aliens the true might of the Terran Confederacy. Throughout the Terran capital, the news of the impending battle spread like wildfire. Citizens flocked to the streets, cheering and waving flags in support of their military forces. The mood was one of unbridled excitement, as the people of the Confederacy eagerly awaited the news of another crushing victory over their alien adversaries. In the Grand Senate chamber, President Harrington stood tall, her expression radiant with confidence. Today, we shall make history, she declared, her voice echoing through the cavernous hall. The Terran Confederacy will emerge victorious, and our dominance over the galaxy will be cemented for all eternity. The senators erupted into a thunderous ovation, their enthusiasm matching that of the citizens who had gathered outside. They were convinced that the upcoming battle would be a mere formality, a necessary step in the Confederacy's inevitable march towards galactic supremacy. As the Terran Defense Fleet's warships moved into position, the alien fleet remained silent and still, seemingly unfazed by the overwhelming show of force. Admiral Petrov, his patience wearing thin, issued the order to open fire. Annihilate them, he barked, his fist slamming down on the console in front of him. The Terran warships unleashed a barrage of devastating energy weapons, their powerful beams and missiles streaking towards the alien vessels. The residents of the Terran capital watched with bated breath, their cheers echoing through the city streets as they anticipated the imminent destruction of their foes. But as the smoke cleared, the alien fleet remained intact, its vessels seemingly unscathed by the Terran assault. Petrov's eyes widened in disbelief, and a palpable sense of unease began to spread through the command center. Impossible, the admiral muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. They should be nothing but space debris by now. Before he could issue another order, the alien fleet sprang into action. Their vessels, once seemingly passive, now surged forward with a speed and agility that caught the Terran forces off guard. Powerful energy beams lanced out, striking the Confederacy's warships with devastating accuracy. The residents of the Terran capital watched in stunned silence as their once invincible military was suddenly thrown into chaos. Panic began to spread through the streets, replacing the earlier jubilation with a growing sense of dread. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Petrov barked orders, desperately trying to coordinate a counterattack. But the alien fleet's movements were unpredictable, their tactics unlike anything the Terran forces had ever encountered. One by one, the Confederacy's warships were crippled or destroyed, their crews fighting with a desperate valor that could not overcome the sheer power and precision of their alien adversaries. President Harrington, her face pale with shock, could only watch in horror as the Terran Defense Fleet was pushed back, its once formidable might now reduced to a disorganized retreat. How is this possible? She whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The answer eluded her, as the Terran capital descended into a state of growing panic and uncertainty. The once unassailable human empire had been shaken to its core, and the realization that their technological and military superiority was not as absolute as they had believed sent shockwaves through the very foundations of the Terran Confederacy. The alien ultimatum. A shocking demand, 2,000 words. The assault on the Terran Defense Fleet had been swift and devastating. The alien vessels, employing tactics and technologies that the human commanders had never encountered before, had swiftly overwhelmed the vaunted Terran warships, leaving them in disarray and retreat. Back in the Terran capital, the news of this shocking defeat spread like wildfire, igniting a maelstrom of panic, confusion, and outrage among the political and military elite. President Eliza Harrington, her composure shaken, summoned her top advisors to an emergency meeting in the Senate chamber. How could this have happened? She demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Our fleet was the most advanced in the galaxy. They should have annihilated those alien vessels with ease. Admiral Mikhail Petrov, his face etched with a rare display of uncertainty, stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Madam President, our forces were simply outmatched," he began, his words carefully chosen. "The alien fleet's tactics and technology were unlike anything we've encountered before. They seemed to anticipate our every move, and their weapons were capable of bypassing our defensive systems with devastating efficiency." Harrington's eyes narrowed as she regarded the admiral, her mind racing to process the implications of this devastating defeat. "Then we must adapt, Mikhail," she said, her voice laced with a renewed determination. "Mobilize our best scientists and engineers. I want them working around the clock to develop countermeasures and new strategies to defeat these aliens." The admiral nodded, his expression grave. "It will be done, Madam President. However, I must warn you, this is no simple enemy we're facing. They possess a level of technological sophistication that may surpass our own. Defeating them will require more than just raw firepower." Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line as she considered Petrov's words. The very notion that the Terran Confederacy might not be the most technologically advanced power in the galaxy was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet the evidence of the battle was undeniable, and she knew that she could not afford to let her pride blind her to the gravity of the situation. "Then we shall meet cunning with cunning," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the assembled advisors. "I want every resource at our disposal dedicated to understanding this alien threat and developing the means to counter it. Failure is not an option. The very future of the Terran Confederacy is at stake." The senators and military leaders present nodded in agreement, their expressions grim but determined. They had never faced a challenge of this magnitude before, and the realization that their vaunted technological superiority might not be enough to ensure victory sent a chill down their spines. As the meeting adjourned, Harrington and Petrov retreated to a private chamber, their conversation hushed and urgent. "Mikhail, I need you to do something for me," the president said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Gather our most elite forces, the ones we've been training for years for just such an eventuality. I want them ready to deploy at a moment's notice." The admiral's brow furrowed in concern. "Madam President, you don't intend to launch a preemptive strike, do you? After what we've just witnessed, I fear that would be a mistake." Harrington's gaze hardened. "I will not sit idly by while these aliens threaten the very existence of the Terran Confederacy," she declared. "If they refuse to back down, then we must be prepared to meet force with force, no matter the cost." Petrov nodded, his expression grave. "I understand, Madam President. I'll see to it personally." As the Terran capital descended into a state of anxious preparation, the alien fleet remained a looming presence on the edge of human-controlled space. Their vessels, now ominously silent, seemed to be waiting, their commander's final words echoing in the minds of the Terran leadership. "You have been warned, Terran." Back on the bridge of the alien flagship, the commander, a being known as Psyloph, stood before a holographic display, his eyes narrowed in contemplation. The battle with the Terran forces had been a mere skirmish, a test of their capabilities, and he was satisfied with the results. "The humans are more resilient than we anticipated," Psyloph murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. "But their arrogance and pride will be their undoing. They have been given a chance to surrender, and if they refuse, we will show them the true meaning of power." The alien officers around him remained silent, their expressions stoic and unreadable. They had long since learned to trust in Sylof's strategic brilliance, knowing that his plans were meticulously crafted and executed with ruthless efficiency. "Prepare a message for the humans," Sylof commanded, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. "It is time we make our demands known." Within the hour, the transmission from the alien fleet reached the Terran capital, its contents sending shockwaves through the leadership. "People of the Terran Confederacy," the alien commander's voice boomed, his words echoing through the Grand Senate chamber. "I am Sylof, leader of the Xenodrax Dominion. You have witnessed the power of our forces, and now you must heed our demands." Harrington and Petrov exchanged a tense glance, their faces etched with a mixture of fury and apprehension. "The Terran Confederacy has long held sway over this region of space," Sylof continued, his tone unwavering. "That reign of dominance ends today. You will surrender your worlds and resources to the Xenodrax Dominion, and your people will submit to our rule. Failure to comply will result in the complete annihilation of your civilization." The senators erupted into a cacophony of outraged protests, their voices raised in a chorus of indignation. Harrington raised a hand, silencing the chamber with a stern glare. "This is an outrage," she declared, her voice carrying a weight of authority that belied the turmoil within. "The Terran Confederacy bows to no one. We will never surrender to your demands, alien. If you dare to attack us again, we will crush your forces and send your dominion back to the depths of space from whence it came." Sylof's response was chilling in its calm. "So be it, Terran. You have been given your warning. Prepare your people for the consequences of your defiance." The transmission cut off, leaving the Terran leadership in a stunned silence. Harrington's hands trembled with barely contained fury as she turned to Petrov. "Mobilize every available resource, Mikhail," she commanded, her voice laced with a steely resolve. "We will not back down from this threat. The Terran Confederacy will stand firm, and we will show these aliens the true might of humanity." Petrov nodded, his expression grim. "It will be done, Madam President. Our forces will be ready, and we will meet the Xenodrax Dominion with the full force of our military might." As the Terran capital descended into a flurry of activity, the people of the Confederacy watched with a mixture of fear and determination. The once unassailable human empire had been shaken to its core, and the realization that their technological superiority might not be enough to guarantee their survival sent a chill through the populace. But amid the growing sense of trepidation, a spark of defiance began to take hold. The people of the Terran Confederacy had weathered countless challenges throughout their history, and they were not about to surrender their hard-won freedom and prosperity to a group of alien invaders. They would stand beside their leaders, ready to defend their way of life with every fiber of their being. As the Terran military mobilized, the tension in the air was palpable. The fate of the Confederacy hung in the balance, and the upcoming confrontation with the Xenodrax Dominion would determine the course of history, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The unexpected onslaught, 2,000 words. The Terran capital was a hive of frenetic activity as the Confederacy's leadership raced to prepare for the impending confrontation with the alien Xenodrax Dominion. Squadrons of the latest generation fighter craft were readied for launch, their pilots undergoing intensive training to counter the unexpected tactics employed by the alien fleet. In the Grand Senate chamber, President Eliza Harrington addressed the assembled military commanders and political advisors, her expression grim but resolute. "Our very way of life is under threat," she declared, her voice carrying a weight of authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. "The Xenodrax Dominion has dared to challenge the might of the Terran Confederacy, and we will not back down. We have endured countless challenges in our history, and this shall be no different." Thunderous applause echoed through the chamber as the senators and military leaders rallied behind Harrington's words. The people of the Confederacy were no strangers to adversity, and they were prepared to fight tooth and nail to defend their freedom and their way of life. "Admiral Petrov," Harrington continued, turning her attention to the weathered commander of the Terran Defense Fleet, "what is the status of our forces?" Petrov stepped forward, his expression stoic. "Our ships have been refitted with the latest countermeasures and defensive systems," he reported, his voice calm and measured. "Our fighter squadrons are ready to engage the enemy, and our ground forces have been mobilized to defend our colonies and outposts." Harrington nodded, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "Excellent. We must not underestimate our foe, but I have every confidence in our ability to triumph." The Admiral's expression darkened, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Madam President, I must caution you. The Xenodrax Dominion's forces have proven to be more formidable than we anticipated. Their tactics and technology seem to surpass our own, and we may be facing a challenge unlike anything we've encountered before." Harrington's gaze narrowed, her jaw set in a determined line. "Then we must adapt, Mikhail. The Terran Confederacy has never been defeated, and we will not start now. Inform your commanders that they are to engage the enemy with everything they have. I want the Xenodrax Dominion's fleet crushed and their leader captured, alive, if possible. We need to understand the full extent of their capabilities." Petrov nodded, his expression grim. "It will be done, Madam President. Our forces will be ready when the Xenodrax Dominion makes their move." As the meeting adjourned, the tension in the Terran capital was palpable. The people could sense the gravity of the situation, and they watched with bated breath as the Terran defense fleet made its final preparations for the impending battle. Across the void of space, the Xenodrax Dominion's fleet remained ominously silent, its vessels hanging in the void like a gathering storm. Xyloth, the Dominion's commander, stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he studied the tactical displays before him. "The humans have mobilized their forces," he said, his voice low and measured. "They have heeded our warning, but their defiance will only hasten their downfall." One of the Xenodrax officers stepped forward, his features unreadable. "Commander, the human fleet is moving to intercept us. Shall we engage?" Xyloth considered the question for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the display. "No," he said finally. "Let them come to us. We will meet their aggression with a display of our true power." The officer nodded, relaying the orders to the rest of the fleet. The Xenodrax vessels remained motionless, their weapons systems primed and ready, as the Terran warships closed the distance. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, Admiral Petrov watched the alien fleet with a mix of trepidation and determination. "All ships, maintain formation and prepare to engage on my mark," he ordered, his voice steady and authoritative. The Terran vessels moved into position, their weapons systems charged and ready to unleash a barrage of devastating firepower. Petrov's finger hovered over the firing control, his eyes fixed on the alien fleet. "Mark," he barked, and the Terran warships opened fire, their energy beams and missiles streaking towards the Xenodrax vessels. But to the horror of the Terran commanders, the alien fleet remained unscathed, their hulls seemingly impervious to the onslaught. Petrov's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the Xenodrax ships weather the attack with ease. "Impossible," he growled, his fist slamming down on the console. "Redirect all power to our defensive systems. We can't let them." His words were cut short as the Xenodrax fleet sprang into action, their vessels surging forward with a speed and agility that defied the laws of physics. Powerful energy beams lanced out, striking the Terran warships with devastating precision, crippling their systems and reducing their hulls to molten slag. Panic spread through the Terran ranks as the once vaunted Confederacy fleet was thrown into chaos. Petrov barked desperate orders, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of alarms and the agonized cries of his crew. On the ground, the Terran colonies and outposts were not spared the wrath of the Xenodrax Dominion. Swarms of alien fighters and ground forces descended upon the human settlements, overwhelming the local defenses with their superior firepower and tactics. The people of the Terran Confederacy, who had once looked upon the alien threat with disdain, now found themselves facing the grim reality of their situation. Their technological superiority, which had been the cornerstone of their power, had been shattered, and they were now confronted with an enemy that seemed to possess abilities that defied their understanding. In the Terran capital, President Harrington watched the unfolding battle with a growing sense of horror. The reports that filtered in from the front lines were grim, painting a picture of a military force that was being systematically decimated by the relentless Xenodrax assault. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the console. "We were supposed to be invincible." The senators and military advisors around her were equally shaken, their expressions a mix of disbelief and growing despair. The once unassailable Terran Confederacy was now facing the very real prospect of defeat, a prospect that had been unthinkable only a short time ago. As the battle raged on, the Terran forces fought with a desperate valor, their pilots and ground troops doing everything in their power to stem the tide of the Xenodrax assault. But for every alien vessel they managed to destroy, two more seemed to take its place, their tactics and technology proving to be a formidable obstacle that the humans simply could not overcome. The Terran capital descended into a state of panic and chaos as the people watched the once mighty Confederacy fleet being pushed back, their hopes of a swift and decisive victory crumbling to dust. Harrington, her face etched with a mixture of determination and fear, turned to Admiral Petrov, her voice low and urgent. "Mikhail, we can't let them breach the capital," she said, her gaze piercing. "Mobilize every available asset. We must hold them off, no matter the cost." Petrov nodded, his expression grim. "It will be done, Madam President, but I fear our forces may not be enough to turn the tide of this battle." As the two leaders braced themselves for the impending onslaught, the Xenodrax Dominion's fleet continued its relentless advance, its commander Xyloth watching the unfolding events with a sense of grim satisfaction. "The humans have been given their chance," he murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Now they will face the full might of the Xenodrax Dominion. Humanity's rude awakening." 2,000 words. The Terran capital was in a state of utter chaos as the relentless onslaught of the Xenodrax Dominion's forces continued to overwhelm the Confederacy's defenses. Panicked citizens flooded the streets, desperate to reach the safety of the underground shelters as the sky was lit up by the exchange of energy beams and the exploding hulks of Terran warships. In the command center of the Terran Defense Fleet, Admiral Mikhail Petrov barked orders, his voice strained with the weight of the impossible task before him. His once vaunted forces were being pushed back, their advanced technologies and strategies rendered ineffective against the sheer power and precision of the alien invaders. "Divert all remaining power to the planetary defense grid," Petrov shouted, his eyes fixed on the tactical displays that showed the Xenodrax fleet's relentless advance. "We have to hold them off, no matter the cost." Around him, the Terran officers scrambled to comply, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. They had never faced an enemy like this before, and the realization that their technological superiority was no longer a guarantee of victory was a bitter pill to swallow. In the Grand Senate chamber, President Eliza Harrington stood, her expression a mask of steely resolve as she addressed the assembled senators and military advisors. "Our homes, our families, our very way of life are under threat," she declared, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the panicked murmuring of the crowd. "The Xenodrax Dominion has dared to challenge the might of the Terran Confederacy, and we will not back down. We have fought countless battles throughout our history, and we have always emerged victorious." The senators erupted into a thunderous applause, their cheers echoing through the cavernous hall. Yet even as they rallied behind Harrington's words, there was a growing sense of unease in the air, a realization that this was no ordinary foe, and that their vaunted technological superiority might not be enough to ensure their survival. "But we cannot simply rely on our past successes," Harrington continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "The Xenodrax Dominion has proven that they possess capabilities that we have yet to fully comprehend. We must adapt, we must innovate, and we must be willing to confront the hard truths of our own limitations." A hush fell over the chamber as the weight of her words sank in. The Terran Confederacy had long prided itself on its technological supremacy, and the notion that it might be vulnerable to an alien threat was a deeply unsettling one. "I have ordered our top scientists and engineers to work around the clock," Harrington said, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. "They are to devise new strategies, new technologies, and new tactics to counter the Xenodrax dominion. We will not go gentle into that good night. We will fight, and we will prevail." The senators nodded, their expressions grim but determined. They knew that the fate of the Confederacy hung in the balance, and they were willing to do whatever it took to ensure its survival. As the meeting adjourned, Harrington retreated to her private chambers, her mind racing with the implications of the Xenodrax Dominion's assault. She had always believed in the inherent superiority of humanity, in the notion that the Terran Confederacy was destined to rule the stars. But now, that belief was being shattered, and she was forced to confront the possibility that their technological and military dominance was not as absolute as they had believed. How could this have happened? She whispered, her hands trembling as she poured herself a glass of brandy. "We were supposed to be invincible." The answer evaded her, and as she stared out the window at the chaos unfolding in the skies above the Terran capital, she felt a sense of dread and uncertainty that she had never experienced before. Back on the battlefield, the Terran forces fought with a desperate valor, their pilots and ground troops unleashing everything they had in a last-ditch effort to hold back the Xenodrax onslaught. But for every alien vessel they managed to destroy, two more seemed to take its place, their tactics and technology proving to be an insurmountable obstacle. Admiral Petrov, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and despair, watched as the last of the Terran warships were crippled or destroyed. The Xenodrax Dominion's fleet had breached the planetary defense grid, and the Terran capital was now directly in their sights. "All units, fall back to the emergency evacuation points," Petrov ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've done all we can. May the gods have mercy on us all." The Terran forces, their morale shattered, began a desperate retreat, their ships limping away from the Xenodrax assault. The citizens of the Terran capital, their cries of anguish and terror echoing through the streets, scrambled to reach the underground shelters, their once unshakable faith in the Confederacies might now replaced by a suffocating sense of dread and despair. As the Xenodrax Dominion's forces closed in on the Terran capital, Xyloth, the alien commander, stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes narrowed in contemplation. "The humans have been given their chance," he murmured, his voice tinged with a hint of regret. "And they have failed." He turned to his officers, his expression hardening. "Prepare to unleash the full might of the Xenodrax Dominion. We will show these Terrans the true meaning of power, and they will know the folly of their arrogance." The Terran capital, once a shining beacon of human technological and military prowess, now braced itself for the onslaught of the alien invaders, its people clinging to the faint hope that their leaders would find a way to turn the tide of the battle. But as the Xenodrax Dominion's forces surged forward, the realization began to dawn that the Terran Confederacy, for all its might and hubris, might not be able to withstand the relentless assault of this new and formidable foe. Humanity's triumph. A hard-fought victory, 2,000 words. The Terran capital was in a state of utter chaos as the Xenodrax Dominion's forces continued their relentless assault. Panic-stricken citizens scrambled to reach the underground shelters, their cries of terror and desperation echoing through the streets as the skies above were lit up by the exchange of devastating energy beams. Admiral Mikhail Petrov, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and grim determination, stood on the bridge of the last remaining Terran warship, his eyes fixed on the tactical displays that showed the ever-advancing alien fleet. "All units, fall back to the emergency evac points," he ordered, his voice strained. "We've done all we can. Get the civilians to safety, and may the gods have mercy on us all." As the battered Terran ships limped away from the onslaught, Petrov turned his attention to the Xenodrax Dominion's flagship, where the alien commander, Xyloth, stood in silent observation. "So, this is how it ends," Petrov muttered, his fists clenched in a mixture of anger and resignation. The Terran Confederacy, brought to its knees by an enemy we never saw coming. But just as he was about to order the final surrender, a new signal appeared on the display, a coded transmission from the Terran capital. Petrov's eyes widened, and a glimmer of hope flickered in his weary expression. "Madam President," he breathed, his fingers flying across the console as he decrypted the message. What he read caused a surge of renewed determination to course through his veins. Turning to his officers, he barked a series of terse commands, his voice brimming with a newfound sense of purpose. "All units, hold your positions. We're not going down without a fight. Relay the following orders to the ground forces. Initiate the Omega Protocol, and begin the evacuation of all civilian personnel to the designated safe zones." The officers, their expressions a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism, acknowledged the orders and set to work, their movements swift and efficient. Petrov, his gaze fixed on the Xenodrax flagship, took a deep, steadying breath. "Madam President, I hope you know what you're doing," he murmured, his fingers hovering over the firing controls. In the Grand Senate chamber of the Terran capital, President Eliza Harrington stood, her expression grim but resolute, as she addressed the assembled military commanders and political advisors. "The Xenodrax Dominion has pushed us to the brink," she declared, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmuring crowd. "But we will not surrender, not while there is still breath in our bodies." The senators and advisors exchanged bewildered glances, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. They had witnessed the overwhelming power of the alien invaders, and the notion that the Terran Confederacy could somehow turn the tide of the battle seemed almost impossible to fathom. "Madam President, with all due respect, our forces are in full retreat," one of the military advisors ventured, his voice laden with trepidation. "We've lost the majority of our fleet, and the Xenodrax Dominion is bearing down on the capital. I fear that any further resistance will only lead to our complete annihilation." Harrington's gaze hardened, her eyes narrowing with a fierce determination that belied the gravity of their situation. "That may be true," she acknowledged, her tone unwavering. "But we cannot simply surrender and submit to the Xenodrax Dominion's demands. The very essence of who we are as a people is at stake. We have fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to simply lay down and accept defeat." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, and for a moment, the senators could see a glimmer of something akin to hope in her expression. "We will not go gentle into that good night," she declared, her voice rising with a newfound conviction. "We will fight, and we will find a way to overcome this challenge, no matter the cost." The senators and advisors exchanged uncertain glances, their expressions a mix of apprehension and a growing sense of determination. They knew that the fate of the Terran Confederacy hung in the balance, and they were willing to put their faith in Harrington's unwavering resolve. "Then so be it," Harrington continued, her voice steady and assured. "Initiate the Omega Protocol and begin the evacuation of all civilian personnel to the designated safe zones. Our scientists and engineers have been working tirelessly, and they believe they have uncovered a way to counter the Xenodrax Dominion's technological advantage." As the orders were relayed and the evacuation began, the Terran capital braced itself for the impending onslaught. The Xenodrax Dominion's forces, sensing victory within their grasp, surged forward, their vessels unleashing a devastating barrage of energy weapons and missiles. But as the alien fleet drew closer, a sudden and unexpected development unfolded. The Terran warships, once battered and in full retreat, turned to face the Xenodrax Dominion, their weapons systems primed and ready. Xyloth, the alien commander, watched the unexpected maneuver with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the bridge of the flagship. Before his officers could respond, a powerful energy pulse erupted from the Terran vessels, the sheer intensity of the blast catching the Xenodrax fleet off guard. Xyloth's eyes widened in shock as he watched the alien ships begin to falter, their advanced shielding systems struggling to withstand the onslaught. "Impossible," he breathed, his fingers flying across the console as he tried to assess the situation. How could they have acquired such technology? The answer soon became clear as the Terran forces unleashed a series of devastating strikes, their weapon systems now able to penetrate the Xenodrax Dominion's defenses with ease. Thyloth's expression twisted into a mask of fury and disbelief as he watched his once unstoppable fleet being pushed back, their vessels crippled or destroyed by the relentless Terran assault. "This cannot be," he roared, his fist slamming against the console. "We were supposed to be invincible." But the Terran forces, their morale reinvigorated by this unexpected turn of events, continued their assault, their pilots and ground troops fighting with a newfound determination and ferocity. Back in the Terran capital, President Harrington and her advisors watched the unfolding battle with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. "The Omega Protocol has been a success," Harrington murmured, her gaze fixed on the tactical displays. "Our scientists have managed to reverse engineer the Xenodrax Dominion's technology and develop countermeasures to their weapons and tactical capabilities." One of the military advisors stepped forward, his expression grave. "But, Madam President, even with this new advantage, the Xenodrax Dominion's forces still vastly outnumber our own. We may have turned the tide of the battle, but winning the war will be an immense challenge." Harrington's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing with a renewed sense of purpose. "Then we must be willing to take that challenge head-on," she declared, her voice resonating with a steely resolve. "The Terran Confederacy will not be cowed by this alien threat. We will stand firm, and we will fight, and we will emerge victorious, no matter the cost." As the Terran forces continued their relentless assault, Sci-Fi, the Xenodrax Dominion's commander, watched in growing desperation as his once formidable fleet was slowly but surely being whittled down. "Impossible," he muttered, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "How have they managed to overcome our technological superiority?" One of his officers stepped forward, his expression grim. "Commander, our forces are sustaining heavy losses. We are being outmatched at every turn, and our defenses are failing. If we do not withdraw soon, we risk the complete annihilation of our fleet." Xyloth's jaw tightened, his gaze sweeping across the tactical displays. For the first time since the beginning of the conflict, he felt a twinge of uncertainty, a realization that the humans, for all their perceived weaknesses, were far more resilient and adaptable than he had ever imagined. "Very well," he conceded, his voice laced with a reluctant respect. "Order the fleet to fall back. We will regroup and devise a new strategy to defeat these humans." As the Xenodrax Dominion's vessels began their retreat, the Terran forces let out a collective cheer, their cries of triumph echoing through the streets of the capital. President Harrington, her expression a mix of relief and determination, turned to her advisors. "This is not the end," she declared, her voice firm. "The Xenodrax Dominion has been pushed back, but they will return, and we must be ready. We will use this time to strengthen our defenses, to develop new technologies, and to forge an even greater alliance with our fellow civilizations in the galaxy." The senators and military leaders nodded, their faces etched with a newfound resolve. They had faced a formidable foe, and they had emerged victorious, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Terran Confederacy. As the celebration erupted throughout the capital, the people of the Terran Confederacy knew that they had been granted a second chance, a chance to prove that their technological and military might was not merely a facade, but the foundation of a civilization that was willing to adapt and overcome any challenge that stood in its way. The Xenodrax Dominion had been beaten, but the Terran Confederacy knew that this was only the beginning of a larger conflict, one that would test the limits of their ingenuity, their resilience, and their unwavering determination to shape the destiny of the galaxy.